Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Good
Morning.
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 Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. Buenos días. Buenas tardes. Bonjour. I'm Rosa Lizardi. I am the co-chair of the NGO CSW New York with my fellow co-chair Pamela Morga, who will be presenting in a little bit. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our virtual monthly meeting addressing structural barriers to economic justice today, Tuesday, December 16th. This is the last meeting of 2025. We are reaching very close to the end of another year where we have worked diligently, engaged closely with you all, with the work of the UN, particularly on gender equality and women's rights and girls' rights. We've done this together, and for the coming year, we hope to continue to strengthen the movement, make it even stronger, to bring a united voice to our collective work. We know it is needed, and right now, we know we need to buttress the work of the UN and double our efforts for next year, 2026. We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our global sisters. So, to begin our meeting, we will first have our co-chair updates about the NGO forum, and later we will focus on the Commission on the Status of Women with Johannes Long from UN Women, who will be joining us at 12:15 New York time. At this point, let me hand over to Pamela to say hello and provide the first updates, and then we will go into our program for the day on addressing structural barriers to economic justice. Pamela.
Thank you, Rosa, and welcome everyone. As we come to the end of this year, gratitude is the first word that comes to my mind. Together across regions, movements, and generations, this community has continued to show up for women and girls in all their diversity, even in the face of shrinking civic space and multiple crises. I want to thank all of you for your tireless advocacy, your expertise, your solidarity throughout our NGO CSW New York programming and the preparations for the Commission on the Status of Women. Your work has amplified grassroots voices, sharpened our feminist analysis, and kept human rights at the center of global debates. As we look to next year, we know that the challenges are immense, but so is our collective power, and we need to remember that. Let us carry forward the lessons, partnerships, and courage we have built together, and let's recommit to a bold, intersectional, feminist agenda that leaves no one behind. So on behalf of the NGO CSW New York Executive Committee and staff, thank you for all that you have done and all that you will continue to do. And we wish each of you rest, renewal, and hope as we close this year and step into 2026 and march boldly to CSW 7. So I just wanted to deliver those brief remarks because we want to let you know how grateful we are for your participation and your support. So moving on to parallel events, as you probably know, in-person parallel event applications are closed. We had over 350 event applications, and I don't believe any were rejected because of content. There were some issues. There were some parallel events. The credit card didn't come through. There were a few where people forgot to list the time that they wanted to have their parallel event But in general, it was a very smooth process. However, because of the volume and the staff, we will not have all of the approvals until December 19th. Please remember, if your in-person parallel event application was too late, if you didn't get it in, there's still time to submit an application for a virtual parallel event. And those applications are open until the end of February. And I'll ask Mads to put, Jamie has already put the virtual event application link. And I'll turn it over to talk about events.
Great. Thank you so much, Pamela. And I echoed your words for renewal and hope in 2026. The Artisan Fair applications are now open. You'll find a link in the chat. The Artisan Fair is held the first week of the NGO Forum, and it's basically a in-person marketplace for some of our constituencies, our partners who want to share their goods and sell them in New York. Some of them use these proceeds to supplement their travel. So we provide the Artisan Fair. It's always very popular. So for those who are interested, the applications are now open, and you'll find the link in the chat. We have also opened the exhibit booth and handbook ads. We're going to open them on Friday, and the deadline is February 16th. So there is time to consider whether you want to buy a handbook ad or an exhibit booth. The handbook ad is a virtual space. It's a great place to promote your organization, your group, your campaign, or your parallel event at the forum. Depending on the tier you purchase, and this year we have a new tier, you can promote your events, your organization, your campaign in a digital handbook. So let's see if we can put the link in the chat for last year's handbook as an example. This year, we have a new category. It's an Instagram story. It's an advertisement where you can upload your graphics, and it will be a 124-hour story before the forum, and then 24 hours the day of the forum, of your event, and it will be featured in highlights. So that's a new way to promote on social media. We also have a friend tier for the interactive digital handbook. It's an advertisement graphic. We have an ally tier. All of these have come with a different price, and they provide different services. So to not go into and take a lot of time into the tiers, just know that in the chat you will get a link to be able to look at how you might want to support the forum with the handbook ad as a friend, as an ally, as a supporter, or even as an advocate. And there is a whole menu of services that come with that, which I hope you will take a look at and consider. It is a great way to really highlight your event. And we also have virtual exhibit booths. There is a $550 application fee for that, and that enables you to engage in many ways on the WOVA online platform. And it provides a space for you to be meeting with your constituencies throughout the 2 weeks. So these are online tools that we hope you will take advantage of and support the forum and support your work and highlight your work. Any questions, please just put it in the chat. I see that the links are there. And we will make sure that we answer them during the program. So at this point, I want to introduce our co-chairs for the Youth Leaders and Young Professionals, the YLYPs, Mads Menor and Emily Van Vleck, who will have an announcement about the youth engagement that they're doing as part of the YLYP. So if we can get Mads, there you are. Mads is also our office coordinator, if you have not heard, because I'm sure if you're engaging with NGO CSW, you are seeing her replies and her announcements.
Most definitely. If you've seen me in the info box, that has been me. But I wanted to take a second to talk about the YLYPs. We had a great session on youth engagement mechanisms in the UN. The recording is on our YouTube, and I just sent it in the chat if you want to take a look at it. And then on January 6th, we have an upcoming event on movement building, designing social change for a feminist future. It'll feature some young movement leaders and really inspirational advocates for gender equality. We're super excited for the event. It'll be from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're interested, please join us in our conversation. I think it'll be a good one. Thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Rosa.
Thank you so much, Mads. Now we're just going to take a moment to pause before we go into our program. Some of this centering we used to do at the beginning. We're now separating the updates from the program with just a centering breathing exercise to be able to shift our minds and our spirit to also gather our thoughts as we move into this panel on addressing structural barriers to economic justice. So I've been tasked with this, and I'm taking some exercises from the Tai Chi classes that I do. So if we can just take some deep breaths, and you can close your eyes just to center ourselves and allow ourselves to just rest and focus. And if you feel more comfortable at this point, just getting up and standing. We end up sitting a lot for this session, so we wanted to divide that, but just taking 3 deep breaths. And now with our hands, we're just going to gather energy from Mother Earth. So just gather energy like this from Mother Earth and bring it up. And now reach into the sky for energy from Father Sky and bring it down. And we'll do that 2 more times. Just gather energy from Mother Earth. Reach up. Gather energy from Father Sky. And one last time. And we'll end with bringing energy from our hands to our upper dantian, wisdom, our middle dantian, love, and just around the point of your belly button, your lower dantian, health. Thank you. And now let's call up Daniel Perel, representative to United Nations Baha'i International Community, who will be, hi, Daniel. It's good to see you.
You too.
Who will be moderating our panel on addressing structural barriers to economic justice. Thank you, Daniel, for being here. And thanks
Thank
to
you.
all the panelists. I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Rosa, Pamela, and everyone. It's really a delight to be here. As I think many of you know, the Baha'i international community has been very engaged in this space. And actually, I think this is my first official NGO CSW meeting that I've attended. Usually it's others who are there. So I'm really very, very happy to be here. So thank you for trusting me with this responsibility. And for any complaints, you can just reach out to Lily. Um, so first, let's just say that I'm very grateful to all of you for joining. I think we're over 100 people, which is wonderful. And I have the pleasure of moderating what I'm sure will be an excellent panel discussion. So I'll set a little bit of framing before we begin, but it'll be largely based on the concept note. You don't mess with a good thing if it looks good. So, but then I'll allow the panelists to take over. So as you're no doubt aware, the priority theme of the upcoming 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women is ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, including by promoting inclusive and equitable legal systems, eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and addressing structural barriers. And as a side note, I'm wondering if this is a new record for the longest priority theme. Somebody maybe can do that research. But anyhow, thus far, deliberations on this theme have underscored that achieving gender equality and women's empowerment requires dismantling systemic obstacles, legal, institutional, social, and economic, that all hinder women's enjoyment of their rights. And during this monthly meeting, we will be providing some space to consider what is needed for governing institutions to foster and direct the potentialities, the goodwill, the energies of entire societies towards the creation of a more equitable and prosperous social order. We'll focus our discussion today on economic justice, including fair opportunity and pay, access to decent work, assets, social protection, and equitable opportunities, which are vital to enabling women's full participation in society. Many women continue to face structural barriers that inhibit economic equity. These barriers, rooted in prejudice and ignorance, as well as, I would add, path dependency and even fear, are often magnified when gender inequality intersects with other forms of discrimination, such as race, ethnicity, indigeneity, or social economic status. Economic marginalization often undermines women's access to justice, for example, by limiting their ability to seek legal redress, reducing their bargaining power, and increasing vulnerability to violence or exploitation. Economic structures, labor markets, social protection systems, asset ownership regimes, and institutional practices are often governed by laws, policies, and institutions which mirror particular assumptions in society, especially assumptions related to progress and power. Discriminatory laws or neglect in social policy create unjust economic conditions. Moreover, assumptions about how we define progress, which is often framed in terms of material accumulation and measured principally through GDP, determine the very systems we establish and then ironically turn to for equal treatment. The result is a framework built on competition rather than cooperation, accumulation rather than sufficiency, and short-term self-interest rather than long-term thinking. This has negative impacts on everything from our treatment of the earth to peace to how we understand care. So by transforming these assumptions, we can change systems in order to build inclusive and equitable legal and institutional frameworks. By addressing economic structures, we strengthen the foundation for justice and equality for all women and girls. So our aims in this conversation are to explore policy, legal, and institutional solutions that promote economic justice, including normative change, inclusive labor markets, social protection, and reform of discriminatory practices, and to generate recommendations that civil society organizations, including this NGO committee, can advocate for in the context of CSW 70 and beyond. So our excellent panel today will look at the following three guiding questions, and likely will insert other wonderful perspectives. So the first is, in what ways are societal norms linked with economic injustice? And how does this impact women's overall access to justice? Second is, what kind of reforms, normative, legal, and regulatory, are necessary to dismantle structural barriers to economic justice? And third is the sharing of best practices. So I will do a very abbreviated, almost disrespectful introduction of our three panelists so that we can then engage in more of a coffee chat style conversation rather than a traditional panel discussion. So first we'll hear from Marin Jimenez, who's at UN DESA. She's part of the UN World Social Report writing team, and she'll focus on social protection. This team has written a couple of reports recently on this very theme. Second, we'll hear from Leticia Leobet, who's the international advisor at Geleres, which is based in Brazil, and she'll focus on international economic injustice, data, and lived experiences. And then finally, we'll hear from Alana Hartzog, administrator for the International Union for Land Value Taxation. She'll look a little bit at labor markets, pay gaps, and care economy. All of these topics are far bigger than the 5-minute interventions we've asked them for, but that's in the hope that we can have a robust conversation afterwards. So after those 5 minutes each, for the next 15 minutes, the three of you, or with my insertions here and there, will speak for 15 more minutes, and then we'll turn for a Q&A session for the last 30 minutes. So with all of that, I'll turn the floor over to Marin. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you so much to the NGO CSW for inviting us. I think it might be the first time that we've ever addressed the group, so it's really exciting opportunity for us. I have like 3 slides, if I could share my screen, and I promise. Oh, I'm a participant. If I can't share them, it's fine. But I wanted to structure these first 5 minutes around, what could I possibly tell this group of people who are working on this space for so long about social protection and women's economic empowerment. And so I thought maybe what I could tell you is a little bit about the World Social Report and the kinds of analysis that we do. And I would frame then 3 points, 2 as kind of an introduction in terms of like what we see around the evidence for poverty and employment for women, and then the third about what that would mean for social protection. So my first point is that we really know less than we think about the experience of poverty for women and girls, and it's really a data issue. There's a lack of data. So there's few cross-country comparable estimates of the prevalence of poverty among different groups, and this is largely because of the way in which we gather data through household surveys and then make some assumptions about poverty. And one of the assumptions we make when we gather data at a household level is that there's an equitable distribution of resources within a household. And so, we take this pot of resources that a household might have, look at maybe 5 people in a household, divide it equitably, and just say that each person gets a 20% share of that. And what we know to be true, at least in the studies that have looked into it, is that actually there is not an equitable sharing of resources within a household, and it's women and girls that are most likely disadvantaged, or they're most often disadvantaged, and that there's very little information to then crossing that data with age. So looking particularly for girls, or looking at older women in particular, we know very little about this inequitable distribution of resources, but what we do know suggests that women and girls in the household, and particularly older women, are disadvantaged. Then just a point about decent work is that I think a lot of times when we talk about employment opportunities for women, there's a lot of focus on closing gaps in education and health, and kind of if you could just make them into better workers, then that would translate into better employment outcomes. But what we find is that better health and education for women doesn't always translate into better jobs. So even though we've seen significant progress in women's education and health globally, this hasn't translated into reductions in the gender gap and the quality of employment or pay. And there was a recent paper from UNU Wider that was really interesting, just to document that the marriage and motherhood penalties persist for women, and they're really correlated with discriminatory laws, and not only those kind of laws that you would think govern the access to economic assets and access to entrepreneurship, but also those on marriage and parenthood. And so then one of the points that I wanted to say about social protection is that gender responsive social protection can lift women and girls out of poverty or prevent falls into poverty, but can also have a lot of positive knock-on effects for the kinds of questions that we're interested in answering today in terms of addressing unequal power relationships and norms. But the big question then becomes how to address gaps in coverage and sufficiency. I mean, the first is that we need social protection systems that are rooted in a legal right to social protection as a basis then to introduce rights-based social protection systems in a country. But then even when social protection systems exist, that we have to address an issue of coverage. So there's 2 billion women and girls currently, I think the last number is from 2023, that lack access to social protection. And so when we're looking at expanding that coverage, we also have to be sensitive to the specific barriers and challenges that girls and women face across the life course. And also within social protection, we often focus on a question of sufficiency. And here in sufficiency, I would use it in two senses. One is in terms of income security, that the benefits received, their duration and under what conditions they're are adequate in terms of ensuring a decent standard of life and being able to leverage these kind of positive knock-on effects we see for education, health, employment, and empowerment. But the second is just to stress that, social protection will not be a panacea. Cash is not enough. What we really need for social protection to have these positive effects is that they also need to be linked to social services, investments in decent work for women, especially around the care economy has a lot of dividends that could be reaped, and then also efforts to dismantle discriminatory practices. I will leave it at there, and I hope that was 5 minutes, but happy to go into any more of the points.
Fantastic. That was right on 5 minutes. Thanks, Maren. And so we'll turn straight away to Leticia, please.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I would like to thank you to this invitation for stay here today, especially because this is an important topic for us. And to begin, I would like to briefly introduce GLEDES, Black Women Institute, my organization. We are a Black feminist organization in Brazil that has worked for decades to confront racism and sexism and to defend the rights of African descent population, especially focusing on women and girls. So today I would like use this space and this time to share one perspective grounded in your current work. We are developing a national public policy for the economic empowerment of African descent women in Brazil. And our starting point is very clear. We understand that these inequalities that affect African descent women are not accidental. Of course, another marginalized groups like indigenous women, and they are a result of a historical political project of exclusion rooted in colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. And these structures that continue to shape institutions, markets, and social norms. And this is a global reality for African descent women, but specifically in Brazil, the scale is striking. And African descent women in Brazil represent like 57 million people, about 28% of the entire population. And we estimate that 61% of African descent women in Brazil participate in the labor force and must live between extreme poverty and the lower middle class. Men per capita approximately $420 per month. And in this context, our proposal is grounded in the idea of guaranteeing a dignified income for these women. And for us, dignity is not only about survival, it's about stable access to housing, food, transportation, education, healthcare, leisure, and the conditions necessary to care for family, community, and her lives, and our lives. In other words, we aim for a structural transformation and focusing in moving women out of a condition of precarity and into a pathway of prosperity. This is our goal. And current data show that more than 16% of African descent women in the labor market are in informal jobs. And this means low-paid positions with no social protection or labor rights. And their average income is around 14% of the income earned by white men. And even when they have a university degree, they are still paid significantly less than white men. So this is not a simple gap, this is structure. And entrepreneurship often presented as a pathway to autonomy and also reflects deep inequalities. Nearly half of African descent women who start a business do so out of necessity, not of opportunity. And their business are concentrated in low profit sectors, often informal. And just only 7 manage to access formal credit. And when they do, they face higher interest rates and stricter conditions. And financial systems and development banks, we need spoke about the development banks, rarely view African descent women as strategic population to invest. Credit criteria such as collateral, formalization, and financial history are designed as if everyone starts from the same point. But we know this is not true. And even the limited available data already show this. So this is what we call economic confinement. And African descent women, indigenous women, or another marginalized groups are kept within a restricted zone of low income, precarious work, informal credit, and lack of recognition as economic agents. At the same time, evidence is very, very clear. When African descent women's income increases, the positive impact multiplies. Studies in Brazil show us that these women prioritize spend on food, education, and children's health, and reducing hunger and improving child development. And on other side, international institutions also demonstrate for us that investing in Black women or in women of African descent in inequal societies strengthens democracy and supports sustainable growth. So, to conclude this first intervention, the question is not whether we should invest in African descent women. The question is, why are we still not doing it in a structural way? This is the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leticia. So it seems that Alana is not here at the moment, which is not great, but we can manage because we have at least a number of excellent speakers here. But as I was listening to the interventions, I had one thought that I wanted to offer to you both for an initial response, and then maybe the two of you can ask each other questions as well. As I was listening, I was hearing kind of this, and many of you may have heard me talk about this before, this distinction between the firefighter and the architect. So the firefighter needs to put out the emergency that exists at the moment, and has to deal with the situation as it is and make the most of it. The architect is able to build a whole new building that may be fire resistant. And we, I think, are often called upon to do a little bit of both. We're trying to both use the system as it stands to do the best we possibly can. So that might be introducing social protection mechanisms or education, technical education elements and things of this nature. But that will only put out the fire as it exists. In order to create a whole new system, we need to essentially make a whole new playing field. And that may be why education itself is not working, because we're using an education system that does not have, as Leticia was saying, dignity at its core. It has skills at its core. And so skills will translate to, maybe allowing someone to have a better resume, but that does not overcome deeply ingrained prejudice. And so I'm wondering, using this false dichotomy of the firefighter and the architect, what's maybe one recommendation for each of these things? Like, what is the thing that you would suggest as a firefighter to help mitigate some of these economic disadvantages? And then what is the thing you would suggest as an architect, something new that could help future generations benefit from a better order? So this is the as it stands and then the structural ones. And hopefully that touches on what both of you have said. And then, of course, Maren and Leticia, I would love if you have questions for each other as well that could be asked. So Maren, I'll turn to you first to offer a response.
Sure. Let me think about it. So firefighter versus architect. I think in terms of firefighter, and I would be interested in hearing Leticia's views on this. One of the things that we learned during COVID as a response in terms of social protection is one that when there's an existing system in place, you can have some kind of rapid response to an unanticipated economic crisis. And the other thing that we realize is just if the political will is there, or there's some kind of momentum behind it, then it can be done, right? All of a sudden the money is mobilized, and if it's valued and it's seen as something that is beneficial to society. So I think
was that the only thing that you said?
In terms of kind of a firefighter response, then I think that I think that looking at not only gender responsive, but also shock responsive social protection and how you mobilize the existing systems in terms of answering questions. And I'd be interested in Leticia to talk about, I know in Brazil, there was a huge effect of preventing falls into poverty, but if there's any data around the gender and race and ethnicity aspects of that in terms of the expansion of social protection during COVID, I'd be really interested in seeing it. And then, in terms of the architect, I think that something that is basic, but I think that really plays an important role. Maybe not so basic, but it's just having the legal structure there and starting at a very high level in terms of what are the constitutional rights and what is the legal framework around that. And that extends to social protection to a couple of constitutions and legal frameworks that guarantee a right to social protection in their countries. And that then gives you that kind of framework to start building on it and not kind of have what we often see are these firefighter approaches where you have this one-off or a small little response that is then very difficult to scale or to have some kind of larger impact because of the restricted nature of it. And I think I would leave it at that.
Thank you, Maren. Leticia, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. When we look to the legal frameworks, we understand that we have so many important legal frameworks to gender equity, but we understand in the same time these legal frameworks is insufficient. And we have a reality that many mechanisms exist only on paper without budgets, without clear targets, or without effective monitoring. So economic policies are simply not designed with race and gender at the center. And for us, this is a big problem. Our financial system also lacks specific policies and indicators to reach African descent or indigenous women or another marginalized groups with credit and financial services. So when we spoke about the financial system, we understand that development banks prioritize large companies and projects with strong guarantees, while micro and small business led by Black women, led by women of African descent, face closed doors. So decision-making spaces are also over white, male, and elite peoples, and African descent women are nearly absent from bank boards, economic councils, and the leadership positions. This means exclusion from both research and the power to decide how those resources are used. So this is also a cultural dimension, and African descent women are often perceived through what we call presumption of insolvency and implicit expectation that they are not reliable, not capable of managing credit, no innovative and now. This is racism and sexism operate inside economic institutions. So for us, our proposal is not simple to create another program, create policies or improve the policies that exist, but it's to change the economic and financial logic that keeps African descent and other marginalized groups, women, confined. We have worked extensively on this, and the finance for development process. It's important to put highlight in this process. We have three important paragraphs that reflect about the structural inequalities, specifically about racism. And we are interested in building a national policy for economic empowerment of African descent women that defines dignifying commons as a central goal, integrate labor markets, entrepreneurship, credit, social protection, and climate adaptation. We need intersects, all this agenda, care economy, of course. And to do this, we need race and gender disaggregate data and clear indicators. We need identify these issues, and after this, we can build in specific policies to addressing these inequalities. So for us, I think is this. I think we need understand better and prioritize the disaggregate data and this criteria, race and gender and ethnicity, and into the financial system and financial architecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leticia. And I'm delighted that Alana has now joined. So what we'll do in terms of the structure is as Alana makes her 5-minute contribution, if you can put questions and comments in the chat box, and that way I can just read from there and allow Maren, Leticia, and Alana to respond sort of directly to those questions, rather than the inconvenience of the back and forth and mute and unmute and all of that. So Alana, the floor is yours. Thanks so
Well,
much.
thank you so much. I'm administrator for the International Union for Land Value Taxation. We have consulting status with ECOSOC. And I have prepared a paper, and I'm going to read just a few paragraphs from it. But first, again, we're the International Union for Land Value Taxation. Land means all the gifts of nature. It means the earth itself. Taxation is the ability to create or destroy. So we pay particular attention to how our tax policies are actually creating more and more of a wealth gap and more oppression, a problem, and how we can turn it around so we can have a fair economy, affordable housing, good wage income for all. So I want to read from Agnes DeMille, who was the grandfather of Henry George, and he was the American political economist who really, in his great book, Progress and Poverty, solved the wealth inequality problem. And he was a continuation of classical economics that understood the economy is land, labor, and capital, and how to have a fair economy. He was the essence of that work in the late 1800s. His work was repressed by a few who like to keep things the way they are, with a very few at the very top. And what they did was, this is a crime, an intellectual crime. It relates to every issue we're talking about. They made the earth, the land itself, a subset of capital. So in the kind of economics most of us are under, there's only labor and capital. The whole question of who should own the earth and how should the earth be utilized and shared is out of the picture. It's not rarely ever considered. So my paper is Women, Earth, and Economic Power. Women once enjoyed a special relationship to the land when tribes shifted to an agricultural way of life. Plants and children were gifts from the gods, and women was the medium for both. Women seemed to have the ability to cause fruits and grain to spring from planted fields. In a mystical sense, the earth belonged to the women, and they had a religious and legal hold on the land and its fruits. As women's role in procreation was demystified, so were our ties to the earth. They were cut. And finding in this age of militarism and environmental rape, it requires that the male and female forces find a new balance and harmony. Neither nature is the omnipotent nor the superiority of individual human beings dominating nature can be a legitimate worldview. We need to affirm the human species in partnership with nature. The various equal rights amendments have yet to affirm the most essential right of all, the equal right of all people to the earth. This is the equal right that furthers human unity and acknowledges our interconnectedness, not only with each other, but also with the earth from which we come and to which we return. One elegant way by which equal rights to the earth can be practically attained is through a public finance system whereby the community created value of land and the resources of the earth. The commons rent, that's a new phrase, the rent of the commons, the value of the commons, is collected for society as a whole instead of other taxes that burden labor and production. When the commons rent, a nature and community created value. When it's not collected for the community as a whole, but becomes private profit for those who own the most and the best land, then the result becomes fortunes for the few and insecurity and impoverishment for the many. With the profit incentive removed from land and land value becomes simply a use value, those who have the most and the best land would pay more into the common fund in the taxes. Fundamentally fair land rights are secured when the land prices are no longer inflated by hoarding and speculation. Land and thus housing becomes more affordable as supply meets demand. In other words, the demand of full purchasing capacity combines with the productive supply, which is enabled when land is no longer treated as a market commodity, but as a right to the commons, the earth itself. This tax reform can facilitate the procuring of other rights and advances needed for human and planetary progress and evolution. Fair land tenure is strategically important for the political, economic, and social empowerment of women. Women are more likely to be wage earners and small landholders. The land value capture approach includes elimination of taxes on their wages and production. Those with smaller holdings use their lands intensively and efficiently. They would be encouraged to produce as much as possible without a tax burden on the products of their labor. Freed from taxation on their productive activities, the purchasing capacity of women would increase. When land speculation and hoarding is curbed, land is released for now affordable access to those who need to use land for productive purposes. These conditions increase gender equality with respect to land. Adequate, secure, affordable shelter brings economic and social stability to women and their families. When economic opportunities are strong elsewhere, as in rapidly developing urban areas, women should indeed always be free to choose to migrate to such areas. But where wages and opportunities for secure livelihood diminish in the urban or wage economy, women and their families should always have access to land for shelter and self-sustaining food production. If, however, land has been enclosed as exclusive property of the few, then the safety valve of secure tender to land is no longer an option. Women and their families then become vulnerable to the entrapment of wage slavery and worse. Women can take a stronger stance against labor exploitation when they have the safety valve of land access. The equitable land rights promoted by shifting to a land value or commons rent based public finance furthers a transparent land tenure system that is not mediated by men or the super wealthy. Commons rent public finance directly addresses the underlying dynamics of power that currently ensnares poor people, women, ethnic minorities, and other vulnerable groups. Increasing numbers of middle-class women are now living in conditions of housing insecurity as well. The affordable housing problem is becoming increasingly severe, as I'm sure you all are painfully aware of. This tax policy reform is a significant tool to promote both urban and rural land reform and housing access. Women should become knowledgeable about this approach to public finance in order to secure full economic and human rights to the earth, to land, to resources via free access to the specifics of legal documents enabling the implementation of this policy, free access to land maps and land value maps so that we can see who owns what land where and what's it worth and how much should they indeed be paying into the public fund. We have access to functional and effective land dispute arbitration in order to determine fair rights of use to land parcels and equitable land value assessments. Women should have free transparency, accuracy, and efficiency of public authorities who are entrusted with the implementation of this form of public finance and participatory decision-making in the distribution and allocation of the funds once collected.
Alana,
Yeah, I'm almost done. 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Several UN agencies are in favor of this land tenure and tax policy approach, particularly the UN Center for Human Settlements, UN Habitat, has endorsed and recommended it in nearly all their action agendas. The problem is they do not seem to have the political will and or perhaps the expertise to actually implement the policy. So to remedy this shortcoming, our organization, International Union for Land Value Taxation, hereby offers pro bono consultation and support to all those who want to take leadership in putting this policy into place in their communities, towns, and cities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana. Wonderful. So we have about 18 minutes left, and I've seen 3 questions come up in the chat box. So I will read those 3 questions, and I'll turn actually to Leticia first, because I know that she has another strategy meeting that she is trying to get to at the same time. But then we'll turn to Marin and then Alana, and please put other questions if you have them. So for Leticia in particular, there is a question from Sekina who mentioned that she's heard about reparatory justice and reparations work being done in Brazil, and she would like it if you are able to speak about the efforts to repair and using the marginally good analogy I said earlier to build a new fireproof building. So that's about reparatory justice and reparations. There was another question for you from Susan Lee, and this is actually for the whole panel, but she called out Brazil, where she said, do the panelists have suggestions or best practices about how to generate political will on behalf of women and girls? I think looking at this political moment. In Brazil, have women's marches been helpful? And how about female political leaders? And then the third question from Angelica is, as I read it, and forgive me, Angelica, I tried to summarize a number of your interventions. In short, how do we ensure that we have different people engaging in these roles, the firefighter roles and architects, that are more reflective of the diversity of the human experience? In large part, how do we have, I mean, to boil it down very honestly, how do we have fewer men and more women engaging in these processes, and what kind of results would we expect? So, Leticia, I'll turn to you first, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for understand that we are in the some process here in Galadas, but I'm very happy to be here. So from Galadas perspective, when we speak about reparatory justice, we are speaking about the full spectrum of rights: political, social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights, and about that fact, the none of them can be realized while African descendant women continue to face a structural violence, because the truth is there is no just when women are killed for disputing institutional policies. There is no justice when the African descendant women are the most exposed to climate disasters. So there is no just when culture is itself, language, memory, spiritually embodied knowledge is developed or erased by institutions that were built without us in mind. So all of this is not accidental, like I said before, and we are still carrying the material and symbolic damage of a colonial project. And it's a project that was lethal for generation, that structured the economy around extraction, and that continues to shape how institutions, market, and public policy operate. So that's why at Galadas we understand reparatory justice is not a symbolic gesture, but a commitment to transform the structures that continue to produce this inequality. And for us, reparatory justice means specific public policies. We need specific public policies designed to correct the results of the historic and ongoing political project. We need redistribution of economic resources and opportunities. We need protection of political rights and safety for African descendant women in public life. We need recognition and strengthening of cultural and spiritual heritage and policies that guarantee climate adaptation, environmental protection, territorial rights. Now, in the COP30, we recognize the African descent women and the Gender Action Plan, just transition and adaptation. This is a way to recognize that these women are vulnerable, more vulnerable than another groups, but in the same time is the recognition that these women are very important to promote solutions. So reparatory justice means for us recognize the contributions that women, African descent women have to building a new project of world. And to the second question, very quickly, we are advancing the context moment in Brazil to improve new policies. For example, yesterday we approved the national plan of care economy in Brazil, and this, of course, is a very important movement. But if you don't have research and if you don't have specific criteria to attending the vulnerable populations, probably we can advance with these public policies. So for us, to summarize, recognize the reparatory justice is advance and recognize the specificities that these women live in Brazil and around the world. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I need leave now, but was a very pleasure stay with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leticia. So Maren, we'll turn to you now.
Thanks so much, Danielle. And Leticia's already disconnected, but many thanks to her too. I really appreciate her reflections and Alana's as well. And I mean, there's two things that I think both of them touch on that I'd like to pick up on in terms of finance. And you know, Leticia spoke of access to credit. Alana speaking about land tenure and taxation. And you know, one of the arguments that we've always made, at least since I've been with the World Social Report, is the idea that we need macroeconomic policies and social policies to be working in tandem. And that really what should be at the center of macroeconomic policy is the creation of decent work and the reduction of inequalities. And you know, once you put that as kind of your guiding light, then the policies that you put in place to reach that goal look probably different than what we're looking at right now. I think one of the things that we are pretty clear-eyed about is that that argument has not made a lot of traction amongst finance ministers. And I think that's really kind of, if we're talking about financing and taxation, that's one of the challenges, at least I know we see, because where I sit within DESA, we service the Commission for Social Development. And it's that, you know, there's large agreement amongst our immediate constituencies in terms of social expenditures, not expenditure, but actually an investment in your population. But that if you try to take that conversation to a Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Planning, you don't see that same kind of agreement. And for a lot of countries too, the primary concern, especially for highly indebted countries, is servicing that debt and trying to get out of that trap, and rather than the kind of expenditure that you would need and able to see social dividends. So I think we're still tackling on that. We haven't given up on that fight, but I think we, at least within DESA, we're aware that we need to be better about trying to make this argument in a way that makes sense and gains traction amongst the finance ministers. Because in the end, they're a lot of the ones who make a lot of the calls in terms of financing these policies. And then, I mean, I saw that there was something in terms of women's representation and decision making. There's existing research that shows that to the extent that there's targets or a specific effort to get more women into decision-making roles within communities, that the decisions that are taken in those bodies in local governance then tend to be more responsive of the community's needs, but also of including women's needs as well. That being said, I'm worried about this moment in terms of political inequality. And that's definitely something that we're looking at right now in terms of the, especially, I mean, one of the things that comes up frequently is what was mentioned. Now, we also were the secretariat behind the Second World Summit for Social Development. So the role of technological platforms, digital platforms, and AI, and how that might reinforce political inequality as opposed, and it provides some opportunities, but I think there's some definite challenges that we have to be clear-eyed about. And then I guess my last point, though, is that thinking about the summit and what gained traction amongst policymakers, one thing that a lot of policymakers seem to be quite interested in talking and tackling is something that we raised in this year's edition of the World Social Report, which is trust in governance. And that seems to hit a nerve amongst policymakers. And one of the things that we argue in the most recent report is that, well, you shouldn't be providing services and fair taxation with the goal of improving trust, but that will be, in trying to realize people's economic, social, and cultural rights, to come up with fair and progressive taxation systems and the delivery of equitable and quality services. The research suggests that trust in your institutions and trust in government will increase, and that then creates a positive circle, in that the more trust you have, the more policy space you have then to implement these kinds of policies.
Thank you so much, Maren. There was an additional question that came in that I think is just lovely. So I'm wondering if Alana could also speak to this, it's from Kabinga Mazaba. It's sort of a two-part question. How do we stop treating women's survival as a crisis issue and start treating women's prosperity as a policy goal? I think that is an amazing framing. So thank you so much, Kabinga, for that. And then secondarily, she puts forth this sort of exercise. She says, if you had to choose between funding 100 small programs or dismantling one discriminatory structure, which would you choose and why? And I think that's a nice little mental exercise as we're thinking about how we approach these challenges. So Alana, your comments on these questions or the others that have been posed would be most welcome. And you are on mute at the moment.
Okay, 5 key questions here about finance ministers. It needs to be brought to their attention that there are international institutions and UN institutions that endorse a shift to the land-based public finance. That said, finance ministers, compared to mayors of cities, seem to have a predominance of control and power in their countries for decision-making about their finances. We need some devolution, some decentralization, so that the mayors who have the problems in their cities right in front of their faces have more decision-making power over their public finance. Some cities are not even enabled to have any decision-making on their local, or don't even have a local public finance system. We urgently need cities to have a clear, strong tax base that serves and furthers the well-being of their cities. The debt problem is horrific. It has to do with the entire problem of how the economy's been structured. Of course, that the countries had to go into deep debt when every country, every region has the capacity, has the land resources and people power to provision for the basic necessities of food, shelter, clean water, healthcare, education. So the debt problem is coming out of the wealth inequality problem and the negligence of looking at the land and resources right under our noses. The debts is so odious that they must be repealed. They must be canceled. It is wrong. It is unethical to put such huge debt burdens on women and children and their families and working people. That needs to be a Jubilee Justice movement that's strengthened once again. Women's roles in decision making. Again, that local women where they live see the problems. Women where they live are aware of the crises and catastrophes under our noses. Again, the need where women can go into their local government and become part of their local government and strengthen the power of their local government to make decisions in support of the prosperity and well-being of the people in their communities. Trust in governance is eroding because governance is not really governing for the well-being of the people. And think of the United States had a big democracy revolution, and there was a Liberty Bell proclaiming liberty. That bell cracked. There's a crack in democracies. The democracy's governance has never given us any right to the land and resources. It is a crack in the Liberty Bell. So we must have an economic democracy and based on the rights to our Mother Earth, the gifts of nature, Earth rights democracy. So as we can empower the localities, the cities, the governance in the cities, and they can strengthen and support the well-being of the people in collaboration, certainly with leadership of women and partnership with women. I think that we will restore trust in governance in these towns and cities, which will be increasingly models that will trickle up to fair governance on the, frankly, national and international level. So I hope I covered most of those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. So we have 2 minutes left. I want to ask you each in 1 minute, if you were in charge, and I know nobody is, but if you were in charge of NGO CSW's fundamental messaging at the CSW this year, from an economic perspective, which is what we've been focusing on this year, what would you say would be the one sort of big message that you would want NGO CSW to be conveying to member states and those who come? And I know it's an unfair question. Marin's thinking, I'm at the UN, I'm not allowed to do this, but we'll forgive it and I'll talk to your whomever I need to. I'm very curious what you would say should be, in your view, civil society's main message on economics, looking at access to justice and all of this. So Marin and then Alana.
I mean, I think one of the points that I would highlight is that the interrelation between economic justice, right? That these things can't be taken in isolation, and that it's a complicated web, and it's maybe a cheat to say, well, it's complicated and it's all interrelated. But that I do think that there is often a whack-a-mole approach in the sense that, well, we'll do some things over here in economic justice and we'll do some other things over here in social justice. And I think that focusing on the interlinkages between economic justice and the other considerations under CSW next year would be some value added to see where those interlinkages lie. And then that gives you some direction in terms of what are the more concrete policy recommendations and actions you'd like to see.
Perfect. Alana, to you.
Well, I would urge that a major theme be women, earth, and economic power.
Fantastic. So we are right on 15 past the hour where I sit. So I think that's the end of my time, but it really has been such an education for me. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. And I'll turn back to you, Rosa. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel and Marin and Alana and Leticia, who's no longer with us, but Alana, mic drop at the very end there. Women, earth, and economic power. Love that. And Marin, thank you for speaking about the intersections. I mean, we just finished the International Financing for Development Conference in July and the Social Summit, the World Social Summit in November. So we cannot forget about those issues. So now in the last 15 minutes, and thanks again, Daniel, for being an excellent pinch hitter. In the last 15 minutes, we are going to provide updates on the Commission on the Status of Women, and also announced that unfortunately we do not have Johannes Lang, who was going to be joining us today, and unfortunately he's unable to be with us. You know, they have a lot of work issues, difficulties right now at UN Women with the defunding and reduction in staff. So we send kudos to our UN Women colleagues, and we hope to have them in January. But for now, I'll just start with a couple of pre-CSW announcements. One of which is that there will be a CSW youth forum that UN Women will organize prior to the CSW for youth advocates. And the expectations and recommendations from this dialogue are expected to contribute to the discussions. So that is all the information we have. We do not have the dates, but if you're a youth advocate on this call, please sign up to receive updates from UN Women so that you can get that information about the youth forum. And we'll put the email that Johannes has given us in the chat. Also, there will be a CSW 70 multi-stakeholder hearing at the end of January next year. That's an informal, interactive, multi-stakeholder hearing with member states, observers of the General Assembly, national human rights institutions, and NGOs in consultative status, academia, and the private sector. More information will be shared. Other information that we heard, we know that there are two co-facilitators for the CSW zero draft negotiations, Liechtenstein and Rwanda. We heard that the zero draft will be out in January. And we also heard that, but we cannot verify that there was mention of the negotiations to be concluded before the CSW, so that delegates can focus on the issues of the CSW revitalization, and other high-level sessions that they have, one on violence against women. So we will gather more information. Please sign up to get our newsletter, and all those updates will come out at that time. So I will turn over to Pamela for the rest of the announcements on the CSW.
Thank you, Rosa. And before I read Johannes's statement, I want to thank Dan for his skillful moderation. For those of you who attended the November monthly meeting, you know that we focused on male allyship. And when I look at Dan, his behaviors throughout the years, as well as what he has done for us today, I want to say that Dan exemplifies what we mean when we talk about the value of male allyship. I also want to thank today's panelists for providing such clarity on the important topic of economic justice. And with that, I'll read Johannes's statement. For NGO registration, we look forward to welcoming civil society to the Commission on the Status of Women session in New York, and numbers of the ongoing CSW registration for representatives from NGOs and consultative status with ECOSOC have been high. So far, more than 2,800 civil society organization representatives have registered and been approved by their organizations. Please ensure that all participants have registered and have been approved by their organizations by the deadline of 23rd of January 2026 at the latest for CSW 70 organization of work. We expect that the CSW 70 proposed organization of work will be available on the CSW 70 website in the next few days. Please check back at, and there is a link that the office will put in the chat for CSW 70 multi-stakeholder hearing. At the end of January 2026, an informal interactive multi-stakeholder hearing will be held with representatives of member states and all observers of the General Assembly, national human rights institutions where they exist, NGOs and consultative status with ECOSOC, academia, and the private sector. More information will be shared in due course. For written statements, NGOs and consultative status with ECOSOC have submitted more than 200 written statements, which will be issued as documents of the Commission and will be available on the CSW 70 website closer to the session. On oral statements and interventions, subject to time availability, oral statements and interventions may be delivered during the general discussion and interactive dialogues by a limited number of NGOs and consultative status with ECOSOC. Sign up for NGOs and consultative status with ECOSOC wishing to make a statement or intervention is expected to open in January 2026. Please visit the CSW website for updates in January. He provides a link that the office will put in the chat. And then finally, side events organized by member states and UN entities. This, I think, is extremely important for many of us on this call. The austerity measures put in place due to the liquidity crisis are expected to continue and affect all meetings at UN headquarters, including CSW side events. Because of the limited space and time available, requests for joint side events will be prioritized. Room requests by member states for CSW 70 side events will open on 13th of January 2026, and the deadline for member states to register a side event is 31st of January 2026, so it's a 2-week window. The schedule of side events is expected to be available on the CSW website by mid-February. Sending warm wishes and happy holidays. And so that is Johannes's statement, and I hope that there is that you're able to get the links in the chat. So now, as we close our meeting, as you know, we have a slogan, and it's a call and response in that tradition. So I'm going to say, what do we want? And then you will say, equality, peace, justice. And then I will say, when do we want it? And you will say now. So it's call and response in the traditions of many indigenous peoples movements. So what do we want? Equality, peace, justice. When do we want it now? So let's go. We'll do it 3 times. What do we want? Equality,
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 peace,
justice.
justice.
we want it now. What do we
Now.
want?
Equality,
Equality,
peace,
peace,
justice.
justice. When do we want it?
Now.
Now.
When do we want it
Time.
done?
What do we want?
Equality,
Peace.
Justice.
justice.
And when do we want it?
Now.
Now.
Woohoo! Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Please
Thank
turn
you
on
for
your
joining.
cameras.
Yes,
Thank you.
open up your cameras and wish everyone a wonderful holiday season, a wonderful end of the year, a wonderful start of the new year. Re-energized, reinvigorated, and full of enthusiasm to tackle the new year, right? We need that. And so we hope you're leaving from here feeling a bit more re-energized, certainly more information, and ready to tackle these issues with equality, peace, and justice. So
And the links are in the chat.
Everybody
Thank you.
open your video. Thank you. Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Gracias.
Bye.
Adios.
Nada.
Bye.
Bye. Be
Bye.
well.
Bye
Take care.
bye. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks for
Bye,
joining.
everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.
Bye, feliz
Thank you so
tarde.
much.